Hey, good morning. We are starting a new book, and it's Swiss Family Robinson. It's a classic, and it is about a family that goes on an adventure, definitely an adventure, and it's going to be about a family that is traveling on a ship from Sweden to Australia, and they get shipwrecked. And it's going to be about the adventure of them being on a deserted island and trying to survive. I want to tell you something though about the book before I start reading it. It was actually written in 1812, so that means the story is 209 years old. And this is a classic. This story is considered a classic because it's really kind of stood the test of time. People have enjoyed it. There are lots of different versions of the movie. It's been translated into lots of different languages and shared around the world because I think everybody loves a good adventure story. So here in the front, we've got a picture of the family, okay? And I am going to go ahead and get started reading. I think there's one more picture I want to show you. Get my mouse over here. This is always kind of awkward here. I'm going to move this over. And I do want to show you kind of what was happening. So the family is from Sweden, and they started their adventure up here. And the father is a missionary, and so he is on his way. He's loaded his family and all their possessions up, and I'm assuming he has traveled all the way around Africa, up here through the Indian Ocean, and his destination was to be over here in Australia. So the shipwreck is going to occur right over here, though, in New Guinea. They get blown off course, and they end up crashing, or the wreck occurs just off the coast of New Guinea. And so that's where they're going to end up. So that's where our story really takes place. All right, let's go to chapter 1, Shipwrecked. All right, here's the ship. Okay, chapter 1. I think I need to put my glasses on for this too so I can see a little better. Shipwrecked. Many years ago, my family left Switzerland and boarded a ship bound for the sparkling blue waters of the Pacific Ocean. Our destination was an island near New Guinea, where we were to establish a colony. Along the way, we ran into a violent storm. For 6 days, the wind howled and tore at the sails while the waves pounded against our little wooden ship, tossing it high in the air. On the 7th day, the masts ripped apart and fell into the sea. Several leaks appeared and the ship began to fill with water. Realizing that the storm had driven us far off course, the frightened sailors fell to their knees in prayer. "You mustn't be afraid," I said to my 4 sons, Fritz, 15, Jack, 13, Ernst, 11, and Francis, 8, who clung to me trembling. "God will save us, for nothing is impossible to him." My wife Elizabeth wiped away her tears and reassured our sons that we would survive this crisis. I admired her courage, but my heart was heavy as I led my family in prayer. "Land ahoy! Land ahoy!" cried a sailor. At that same moment, the ship crashed into a large rock, sending everyone on board reeling in all directions. Then we heard a loud crack as if the whole ship was falling apart. Suddenly, the sea came rushing in. "All is lost!" shouted the captain in his booming voice. "Into the boats, men!" As the terrified sailors rushed by us, Elizabeth and the children looked at me in wide-eyed amazement. "Stay calm," I said. "There's no reason to panic. First of all, the water hasn't reached us yet, and secondly, we are near land. Wait here in the hold while I go see what is the best thing to do." On the deck, one wave after another knocked me down. When I finally struggled to my feet, I was greeted by a scene of utter disaster. The ship was completely shattered, and there was a large gaping hole in one side where the water was rushing in. The crew just cut loose the ropes of the boats and were pushing off into the churning sea. "Hey, come back!" I shouted, but the angry ocean drowned out my cries. Soon the boats disappeared from sight. My only consolation was that since the ship's stern was lodged between 2 rocks, we were safe for the time being. Peering through the rain, I could make out the dim outline of land in the distance. With luck and the change of tide, we should be able to reach the shore sometime tomorrow, I told my solemn sons when I went below. "Come, let's eat some dinner," Elizabeth added bravely, sensing my anxiety. "We have a long night ahead of us." Fritz, my eldest son, who realized the danger we were in, sat up with me long after his brothers fell asleep. "I've been thinking," he said. "If only we had some life jackets, we could swim to shore." "Good idea, Fritz," I answered. "Let's see what we can find to make them with." In the kitchen, we uncovered some small wooden butter tubs. We tied these together 2 by 2 using towels. When we were finished, we had made 6 life jackets. Delighted with his accomplishment, Fritz curled up near his brothers and fell into a sound sleep. Elizabeth and I, fearing that each strange sound might spell disaster, kept a prayerful watch through the long night. The first rays of morning light awakened the boys, and they rushed up on deck to see a bright sun shining over the Pacific. As we saw that the sea was calm at last, our spirits began to soar. "Let's put on our new life jackets and swim ashore," Fritz cried. "Well, maybe you can swim, Fritz," Jack answered cautiously, still shaken by the desertion of the crew, "but the rest of us can't. We'd soon be drowned. Wouldn't it be better if we make a float of rafts to get to land that way?" "Well, good thinking, Jack," I said, slapping him on the back. "Get busy, everyone. See what you can find." When Jack opened the doors of the captain's quarters, his 2 huge dogs, Turk and Flora, came leaping out. They licked Jack's face and hands hungrily. Jack jumped upon the back of one and was holding tightly to its ears, rode him up on deck. "Better be careful," I warned. "A hungry dog can be dangerous." "You'll be glad enough to have these dogs when we get to land," Jack replied. "They'll be great help hunting and shooting." "Look what I found," called a voice from below. Rushing down, we saw 4 empty casks floating about us in the water. We immediately fished them out and sawed them in half, making 8 tubs, each big enough to hold 1 person. I then salvaged several long planks from the hold and placed the 8 tubs upon one, nailing each tub securely to the plank. Then the boys and I nailed 2 planks on each side of the tubs, creating a narrow but sturdy boat. After cutting other planks into paddles, we lowered the boat into the water. We were ready to set sail. "Wait," cried my wife, scurrying up from another section of the hold. "You won't believe what I've discovered. A cow, a mule, 2 goats, 6 sheep, and a pig." She caught her breath, then went on, "plus hens, roosters, pigeons, geese, and ducks." "What a wonderful find," I exclaimed. "But we can only take the roosters and hens with us on this trip." I then tucked them in the tub that already held the gunpowder, threw the pigeons up in the air, and put the other fowl in the water. The provisions filled another tub, leaving each member of the family with his own individual tub to ride in. So here is what this looks like. Maybe. Get my mouse to work here. There we go. Now this is a little blurry. The image was blurry, so it's not the camera, it's the image. But I think what you can see are the barrels that they cut in half. They connected them together, they loaded their gear in, and off they go. Here's one of the dogs. Off they go from the ship up to the shore. I then tucked them in the tub that already held the gunpowder, threw the pigeons up in the air, and put the other fowl in the water. The provisions filled another tub, leaving each member of the family with his own individual tub to ride in. "I shall never muster enough courage to get into one of these," said Elizabeth nervously. "Come now, dear wife, I think your tub is a better sailing ship than the wreck we're leaving behind." I took her by the arm and gently guided her into the little round vessel. "We're off," I yelled as we pushed away from our wrecked ship. Turk and Flora swam after us, along with all the cackling geese and ducks. The sea was calm and the sky was bright blue, with not a cloud in sight. Paddling along, we passed chests and casks from the shipwreck and managed to seize 2 of them and pull them aboard. As we approached land, we saw that the coastline was rocky and barren on one side and green and lush on the other. Suddenly, we hit a swift current, which swept us toward the rocky coast and into a little opening between the rocks. That opening was the mouth of a small creek. Standing on the banks of the creek as it widened into a river, calmly watching our arrival, was a family of penguins. while pink flamingos soared over our heads, flapping their wings to wish us a warm welcome. "We're safe," cried the boys, jumping out as we touched land. Elizabeth and I gathered our family around us and thanked God for a peaceful landing, and our hearts were full of joy. After unloading the boat, we pitched a tent near a brook and made beds of dry grass. Elizabeth helped us construct a crude kitchen, and she began preparations for dinner. While I was dragging the 2 casks up from the shore, the boys set out to explore the area. Jack found a giant lobster, and Ernest discovered an oyster bed. Fritz, returning from the other side of the creek, brought back an agouti, which is a native pig. He told of beautiful woods and fields with soft green grass for our animals to eat. "Tomorrow we'll return to the wreck and bring all the animals here," I assured him. "Did any of you see trace of the crew?" But neither Fritz nor the others had seen even a glimpse of the sailors. After dinner, as the sun sank in the west, we retired to our tent. We'd been through a frightful ordeal, but it was grateful to be alive and to be together. And so it was that my family, shipwrecked at sea, spent their first night on a desert island somewhere in the South Pacific. So that is the end of chapter 1. And there were a couple things that kind of came to my mind as I was reading it. And I started thinking, and I wondered if you guys thought of any of this. First thing that I started wondering about is if anyone else might be living on this island. The picture that we saw when we looked at the maps really did show a pretty large island. So I suppose maybe there's a possibility that there are other people on the island that they, of course, haven't discovered yet. Another thing that kind of came to mind was what other kind of animals might live on this island once they have a chance to maybe get out and explore. You could kind of turn and talk to other people in your group and maybe, talk about what you think might be happening, kind of make a prediction as to what they're going to find. All right, so again, remember, one thing I had to keep reminding myself as I was reading this is this story took place, what did I say? 209 years ago. So this is before the time, certainly before the time of power tools. They're going to do a lot of building. Grocery stores, certainly not on this island, so they're going to have to do a lot of hunting to get their own food. They're going to have to look for fruits and berries and vegetables, possibly that they can be eating, things that they can eat. They're going to have to look for animals for food. So you might be thinking about, what they're going to find once they get out there and how they're going to eat. Oh, I started thinking too, how are they going to start a fire? I don't know. Everything's kind of wet. The last thing I wondered is, do you think this is something you would find adventurous and exciting? Or do you think it's something that you would find really frightening and scary? Okay? I would be curious as to what you're thinking. Again, you can share with the people in your room and maybe have a discussion about, if you think it would be exciting to be stranded or to kind of hopefully momentarily stranded on a desert island. All right, that's the end of chapter 1. Okay, we are ready for chapter 2, Return to the Wreck. And here is a picture of the barrels that they cut in half yesterday that they're going to use kind of as their boat to get them back and forth from the island to the wrecked ship. And here is a better picture of the big dogs that they found in the captain's cabin when they were kind of exploring the boat after everybody left. All right, let's see what happens when we return to the wreck. All right, the next day we were awakened at dawn by the crowing of the roosters just outside our tent. Over a breakfast of lobster meat and biscuits, Elizabeth and I made plans for our first full day on the island. "Don't you think you should investigate the land on the other side of the river and see if it's as lush and green as Fritz says it is?" she asked. "You're right," I told her. "We definitely should compare the 2 areas before deciding where to build our home." "Keep your eyes open for any sign of crew," Elizabeth called as Fritz and I started on our journey. With this in mind, we chose a path near the shore so that we could be in a position to spot the sailors quickly. But alas, there was no one in sight. All we could see was the wreck bobbing up and down in the azure blue sea. We had just crossed a shallow part of the river when Turk came bounding up and taking the lead, guiding us through the tall grass and tangled vegetation to the top of a hill. The world we discovered that day was truly a tropical paradise. We passed through forests of towering trees of all types, fields of sugarcane and rolling hills of grass, leafy green plants and fragrant flowers. Brightly colored birds darted across our path, and monkeys chatted in the trees as they watched our every move. At noontime, we entered a forest of palm trees. The monkeys, frightened by Turk's barking, scurried up to the treetops. From there, we watched as we ate our lunch of leftover lobster and biscuits, making hostile noises and grinding their teeth all the while. Suddenly, Fritz leapt to his feet. "Father, I have an idea," he cried. "I'm going to put these monkeys to work." With that, he began throwing stones at the treetops. This infuriated the monkeys, and they began tearing off all the coconuts they could reach and hurling them down at us. Laughing loudly at the success of his scheme, Fritz opened up some of the coconuts with his hatchet. He passed one to me, and we drank thirstily from the milk, which we both agreed was not all that tasty. In late afternoon, we headed for home, weighed down by a sack of Fritz's coconuts, a large bundle of sugar cane, and a collection of plates, bowls, and spoons that we had fashioned from gourds. Along the way, we had still another tussle with a troop of monkeys, this time on the ground. Turk, barking loudly, charged into their midst and brutally attacked a female monkey who was cradling a baby in her arms. "No, Turk!" Fritz shouted, rushing to the rescue, but it was too late. Turk not only killed the monkey, but he completely devoured her as well. At first, her little orphan baby hid in the grass, but then he scampered out and climbed up on Fritz's shoulder. Father, can't I take him home with me?" Fritz begged. "I will feed him my share of the coconut milk and take good care of him." "All right, bring him along," I replied. "I suppose it's the least we can do." No bigger than a kitten, the little monkey rode gleefully home on Fritz's shoulders. They were greeted with shouts of welcome by the other boys, and the monkey soon became a real family favorite. Elizabeth was delighted with our haul, and she showed us how she, too, had been busy while we were gone. She had made a turnspit on which little Frances was now roasting a goose. Beneath the goose, she had spread out oyster shells to make the perfect drip pan. "You know, my dear," she said after I had taken my first bite of the goose, "I do think the land we explored today would make us a good home. However, before I begin such a project, I think we should bring the animals in from the wreck." "I'm sure you're right," Elizabeth said, passing around some Dutch cheese from one of the casks. "Otherwise, they will wash away in the rough sea. Fritz and I will leave at dawn. I don't like leaving you and the other boys alone, so before we go, I will erect a pole with a white flag flying. If an emergency arises, take down the sail and fire a gun 3 times. With the signal pole erected, Fritz and I sailed back to the wreck early in the morning. The first thing we did was to load up 6 of the tubs with the provisions we found on board: kitchen utensils, a silver service, metal plates, chests of wine and butter, ham, sausages, sacks of grain and potatoes, farm implements, hammocks, and blankets. Filled to the brim now, the tub sat dangerously low in the water. Fritz then attached a sail and rudder to our little ship to help speed the voyage back to land. "Perhaps we could make a raft for all the animals," he suggested. "Now, son, how could we persuade a cow, a mule, 6 sheep, 2 goats, and a pig to get on a raft, much less remain still long enough to ride to shore? No, we'll have to think of something else." "How about life jackets?" Fritz cried. "We can make each animal a life jacket." At first I laughed, but then I decided it was worth a try. Each life jacket consisted of 2 casks, one on either side of the animal. These were tied together by leather thongs with a large cork underneath for buoyancy. One by one, each animal was fitted with his life jacket, then pushed into the sea. After only a moment underwater, the animals quickly bobbed upward and began swimming toward the shore. Mighty proud of ourselves and in high spirits over the success of our experiment, Fritz and I hopped in the 2 empty tubs, one on each end of the boat. "We're off!" I shouted. With the wind filling our new sail, it took no time at all to get halfway to land. Suddenly, Fritz grabbed me by the arm. Father, look what's coming!" I turned my head just in time to see a big slippery creature rise to the surface, then plunge beneath the water again. I sat frozen, for heading straight toward the animals was the biggest shark I had ever seen. That's the end of chapter 2. All right, so we can make a prediction about what we think might happen with this shark. Is he going to attack some of the animals? Are they going to be able to fight him off? How do you think you would respond to something like this? They're kind of at a little bit of a disadvantage. And do you think the animals will even all make it to the shore and be okay? Also, again, I wonder how you feel about as their adventure kind of unfolds. Is this something that you would find exciting? Or again, would you find this kind of frightening? So, something to talk about. Chapter 3 is going to be the Nonsuch Bridge. Okay, chapter 3, the Nonsuch Bridge. And in this story, in this chapter, they're going to decide that they're going to find a location where they want to kind of start to build a home for themselves, but they're going to encounter a river that they're going to have to build a bridge over. Now, remember, this is fiction, and it's kind of a little bit of fantasy. It is adventure, and fiction means that it's just not true. So the father and the boys are going to build this bridge to be able to get themselves across this to their new location. And I'm going to also show you another slide. They're going to start to build their home. They're kind of afraid of being on the ground because of wild animals and things like that. So they are going to go ahead and build a home for themselves up in the trees, kind of like a tree house. And they're going to be talking in this chapter about a type of tree called a fig. This is a strangler fig, and these grow in tropical areas. And you can see that they really almost have like a root system that comes out from the trunk of the tree. These are kind of like a type of aerial type root, and they do grow in regions that are tropical and very humid. So, and it would be kind of easy to kind of get up something like this because you'd have a lot of things to hold on to. So in this chapter, we're going to talk about the bridge, and we're going to be introduced to this new kind of tree. I'm going to go back to the bridge while I get started. All right, here we go, the Nonsuch Bridge. All right, we ended though chapter 2, remember, with the shark approaching the tubs. So now we're going to find out what happened there. Fritz, get your gun ready, I cried. Fire the moment the shark is close enough. Moving with the speed of lightning, the fish headed for the boat. Reaching the animals first, it attacked one of the sheep. Fritz fired 2 shots, which hit the shark in the head. Wounded, the creature turned into the water and hurried off to sea, leaving behind a long, bloody trail. Breathing a sigh of relief, we quickly guided our craft onto the shore. As we landed, Elizabeth and the boys came running to welcome us home, laughing loudly at the sight of animals in life jackets. The boys helped remove them. One by one, the animals went lumbering down the sandy shore to explore their new island home. I have something for you, my dear, I said, handing Elizabeth the ham from one of the tubs. This will feed us for some time to come. And I have found something in the sand that will make a delicious side dish, she answered, smiling. With that, she produced a dozen turtle eggs she had been hiding behind her back. See, Father, said Ernest, they're just like the ones Robinson Crusoe found on his island. What a wonderful supper we shall have, cried Francis, clapping his hands. That night, Elizabeth spread a tablecloth on the end of the butter cask and set the table with the plates and spoons from the ship. She placed the ham in the middle with cheeses and a turtle omelet on either side. By and by, all the animals came and assembled around us as we ate this tasty meal. We felt like the kings of a grand new country. As we were finishing this feast, Elizabeth burst out, I cannot wait to tell you my news. While you were gone, I decided to see for myself what the land on the other side of the creek was like, and I found the most beautiful woods you can ever imagine. Actually, it's a grove of 14 of the tallest and broadest trees in the world, and each tree is supported on either side by giant arches formed from the roots. I do believe it's the perfect spot for our home. And that takes us back to our fig trees. But my dear, we're fine right here, I protested. We're near the ship, which still has some valuable supplies on board, and we are protected on all sides by these rocks. But wild animals could leap over those rocks in a minute, Elizabeth argued gently, and I have everything I want from the ship. Besides, it frightens me to have you sailing that treacherous sea. We shall have to give the matter careful consideration, I said. If we're to leave this place, we will have to build a bridge across the river. But that will take such a long time, Elizabeth cried. Despite Elizabeth's concern, the construction of the bridge, the Nonsuch Bridge, as we called it, took place in only one day. Luckily, we found all the timber and planks we needed on a nearby islet and carried them back to our island on the boat. Then we harnessed the cow and the mule with ropes so they could pull the lumber to the site of the bridge. With the lumber there, I had to devise a plan for laying the timber across the 18-foot expanse of river. After much deliberation, I decided to first attach one end of a plank to the trunk of a tree by a long cord. I then fastened a second long cord to the other end of the plank. To the free end of the cord, I tied a rock, which I then tossed across to the opposite bank. I immediately crossed the river and fastened a pulley onto a tree there. Untying the rock, I then passed the loose end of the cord through the pulley. With this cord in my hand, I recrossed the river. Next, I attached the cord to the mule and cow, who slowly but surely began to move. Braying and mooing all the while, they gradually pulled the plank across the river. To my great joy, I saw it touch the other side and become permanently fixed. We did it! We did it! We built the bridge, yelled Fritz as he and Jack bounded quickly over it. We laid a second and a third plank the same way, and soon we had a broad and handsome bridge over which to safely travel. Once the bridge was completed, we loaded all of our provisions on the cow and the mule, with each of us carrying a gun and a sack of goods. We were ready to move. Frances climbed on the mule and rode on Turk's back, making 1,000 funny faces as he bounced along. All the other animals trailed behind us. After our caravan crossed over Nonsuch Bridge, we passed through the high grass, the dogs lingering behind in the grass, howling loudly. Finally, the older boys ran back to see what the trouble was. "Father, come quickly," Jack called. "Here is a monstrous porcupine." By the time I reached the spot, Jack and Flora were running frantically to and fro with bleeding noses. As they circled the giant porcupine, the frightened animal, the porcupine pierced them deeply once again with its sharp quills. This time they howled even louder. Jack quickly took a pistol from his belt and shot the porcupine dead. The boys crowded around the extraordinary animal, hoping to drag it along with them. But unfortunately, its quills were too deadly, and they were forced to abandon it. Not long afterward, we entered the place of the tall trees, which had so intrigued Elizabeth. And here we are. "What trees! What height! What trunks!" I exclaimed. "I've never seen anything like them. This is indeed the place we shall make our home. Why, there's not an animal alive that could reach a house in those trees." Suddenly, Francis came running up. His mouth was crammed full of something as he called out, "Mother, Mother, look at the wonderful fruit I found." "Oh, for goodness sakes, you shouldn't eat anything unless you know what it is. You could be poisoned and die." With that, Elizabeth opened his mouth and removed the remains of a fig. "A fig!" I cried. "Where did you get it?" "In the grass, Papa, under these big trees. And there are many more. I thought they must be good to eat because all the animals were eating them. Watch this." And Francis handed a fig to the little monkey, who turned it round and round, smelled it, and popped it right into his mouth. "Bravo, Mr. Monkey!" cried Fritz and Jack. "Now, boys," I said, "we must make a ladder that will reach the tall branches of our beautiful fig trees." "Papa," said Ernest, "I saw some bamboo canes in a marsh near the shore. They'll make a fine ladder. Let's go get them." Ernest, Fritz, and I set off for the shore. We cut the bamboo into 5-foot-long pieces and tied them in a bundle. Just as we were leaving to head for home, we heard a noise in the thicket. The boys and I jumped back, but Flora, who had accompanied us, pricked up her ears and dashed into the brush. Before we knew what was happening, Flora was locked in a deadly combat with a wild, screeching jungle animal. All right, That is the end of chapter 3. Now, you might want to make a prediction again as to who you think the dog is, what kind of animal the dog is fighting with that he has met. And I will tell you, there are lots of animals in this story and that I don't think I realized even necessarily lived in this part of the country. I was surprised initially to find there were penguins there, but again, it's fiction. Did any of you think that building a bridge in one day, that's pretty phenomenal? You know, these guys are really pretty skilled, actually. How do you think you'd feel about deciding that up in this tree is going to be your new home? How would you feel about a tree house? Maybe some of you have ever been in a tree house. You know, it's kind of like when you go to the park and they have those giant climbing things that you can get up on. Sometimes there's like a little house up there. It would be kind of fun maybe to be up high because you'd have a great view of everything. And it probably, Mother's right, it would be safer to live up high. You could even pull your ladder up at night, you know, and then that way nothing could get you. So they're talking about building the tree house. We're going to find out what happened with what the dogs have found recently. And remember, in this story, because the story happened so long ago, hunting and having guns and having young boys even carrying guns was something that was just like totally normal back then. So as they encounter these different kinds of semi-dangerous situations, you know, they just are able to respond like that.